the story that's been dominating a lot of headlines recently is Apple was the largest company, first one to hit 1 trillion. Now Microsoft and Apple are kind of jockeying for that title. Two very different paths to getting to that point, Evan.
Right. So now, they're both right around $850 billion in market cap. So they're comparable. I mean, just whoever's in the lead kind of just depends on when you're checking the quotes, just because, they're just neck and neck. And to kind of put some context into the last time Microsoft and Apple had similar market caps was when Apple first overtook Microsoft's market cap back in mid-2010. At that time, Steve Jobs was still alive, the iPad had just been released, and the current iPhone was the 3GS. There was no such thing as a Retina display, and Microsoft was still selling the Zune. So that seems like ancient history.
It was a different time, a simpler time, one might say. But them being neck and neck now, I think, is kind of a nice entree into us talking about Apple and Microsoft, where these two companies might be going. And really, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about Microsoft as a business. They've been kind of flying under the radar and putting up some pretty good results. So we're going to hit that today. And we're also going to hit some new news from Spotify and their international expansion. To kick things off here, I mean, Microsoft is up 30% year to date, while the market has been pretty much flat. Or I guess that's over the past 12 months, not year to date. Even so, though, Evan, the stock has been crushing the market. Apple has had the opposite happen. They've been getting crushed. What's been going on with these companies?
So, I mean, Apple, peaked in early October, and then all this China trade war stuff combined with earnings and just these reports that they're cutting production on the iPhone at XR. A lot of these kind of negative, storylines are kind of contributing to Apple pulling back quite a bit. Meanwhile, Microsoft has just been over the past, even further out. I mean, past 2-3 years, it's just been marching steadily higher, just very consistent, very just up and to the right. And I think a lot of that is attributable to CEO Satya Nadella just really continuing to execute well on his cloud and cross-platform strategies. So now, with the Apple pulling back, Microsoft continue to go up. Here we are. Now they're kind of neck and neck again.
Yeah, the story for Microsoft is they made this switch in how they were delivering the Office suite and making it an as-a-service business. I think this helped remedy a lot of the issues that they were experiencing, right? Because in the past, you could run on old Office software that you bought for quite some time and just kind of run it basically until your machine hit the ground and it was useless. Now you're paying a monthly subscription or something like that. It's much more appealing, gives them much more steady cash flows. And we talk about this a ton, but as a service, businesses are just better if you're trying to deliver software content. They made that switch. It was a little painful for them to do that, but they're clearly enjoying the results of that now.
Right. I mean, they started this a long time ago, and you're absolutely right. Generally speaking, investors love subscription businesses because it's recurring, it's usually high margin, and it gives you a lot of visibility into where this business is going. And Microsoft recognized this, many years ago, and well before Nadella came on board, or not on board, but was named CEO. But I mean, they launched Office 365 back in 2011, and Office has always been one of their most profitable cash cows, and getting that business to a subscription model was always uncertain, but they've done an incredible job with that. They now have over 170 million users for Office 365, including both commercial and consumer. So I think they've done a really good job over the past 7 years getting that business into a subscription model and really justifying why that model makes more sense for most customers, including both enterprise and home users.
And the software side is really what separates these two businesses. Apple is a hardware company that is trying to build its services segment. Microsoft is a software company that just seems to have its hands in everything. You look at the gross margins for these two companies, Microsoft over 60%, less than 40% for Apple. That's a big part of why we see two very big companies trading at totally different valuations.
Right. I mean, Microsoft is trading at about 45 times earnings compared to Apple's 15. So that's a pretty stark contrast in terms of the underlying earnings valuations of these two companies, even though their market caps are now similar. And in contrast, Apple's only been really focusing heavily on this services business for only about a couple of years. I mean, of course, they've always been focusing, trying to grow it, but really highlighting it in terms of telling investors, hey, look how well we're doing. They only started really talking about it back in early 2017 when they publicly put out that goal that, hey, we're going to double this business over the next 4 years. But as you mentioned, still, a lot of this business is still very much dominated by hardware, which is fundamentally less profitable than software.
Yeah, and these models are a little bit different too, right? Even though Apple is saying, hey, we're focusing on software, well, all of that software is predicated on their own hardware sales. You know, they aren't really getting much in the way of revenue if someone is buying an Android device. And that's not the case for Microsoft. You know, they don't have to worry as much about hitting with hardware products because the software that they make is so industry standard. It's so ubiquitous.
Right, and I think that those are all reasons that are contributing to why Microsoft has this premium compared to Apple. I mean, Apple's total revenue base is also about 2.5 times as large as Microsoft. So I think that the market is recognizing that Microsoft probably has a little bit more upside in a lot of its core markets. I mean, if you compare it to like the smartphone market, which globally is relatively saturated in terms of unit volumes, which we've seen play out with Apple's own unit volumes that they've been reporting. Whereas Microsoft, just the enterprise productivity market is huge and still growing. They also have a lot of exposure to the really booming cloud infrastructure market, which is the cloud hosting services for third-party companies, and they're only second to Amazon Web Services, and that market has massive upside many years going forward. Just for an example, last quarter, the third quarter, the overall market grew almost 50%. So that's kind of growth that they have exposure to that Apple doesn't.
Something that's really compelling about that too, Evan, is you think about the major players there. If Amazon's number one, and you're, say, a retailer or you're in the e-commerce space, would you rather give your business to Microsoft or Amazon? By not operating there, they are able to offer a lot of people who would probably rather be separate from Amazon a pretty viable number two. And I think that is probably going to be something that gives them a lot of success in the cloud market.
Right, and they're doing better than Google too. I mean, they're ahead of Google. Their market share is about twice as big as Google's right now. So between Amazon's number one, Microsoft's number two, Google's number three. But I think Microsoft has a much stronger case because it's always been such a strong enterprise software and services player that they have so much else they can really offer to companies that need these services, in addition to just cloud infrastructure. They have productivity software and all these things. So yeah, I think they have a really strong value proposition overall.
I think the natural question, Evan, is, okay, the market has been choppy. I'm sure that there are a lot of people that are looking for some safety when it comes to the stocks that they own. These mega cap companies offer that. They offer dividends. They aren't going anywhere, right? They pass the snap test. If these companies disappeared overnight, people would notice. If you have to pick between Apple and Microsoft, which one are you going with?
I would say Apple's safer just by virtue of that earnings multiple being so low. I mean, fundamentally, any company that has a higher earnings multiple is a little bit more subject to volatility if people start getting concerned about the market and volatility is going up. I mean, that being said, I still think Microsoft is doing incredibly well and executing very well. But just if you look from a valuation standpoint, I would say that Apple's a little bit safer.
What about on the business model side? I'm thinking about this outside of the core financials because I look at what Microsoft's doing and I look at what Apple's doing. And I mentioned before, Apple's success is predicated on hardware sales. Not that the iPhone is going away anytime soon, but that is that looming existential threat to that entire ecosystem, is that a better mousetrap is developed in the smartphone space or some other device comes along. If you're saying, I'm going to set this and forget this for 5 years, are you sticking with Apple?
I'd probably say so, but I don't think Microsoft's a bad play by any means.
Yeah, I think you could do a lot worse. For my money, if I'm going to throw one out there, I'll take the other side of this one, Evan. I'll take Microsoft over the next 5 years. The recurring revenue is appealing to me. I say this as an Apple shareholder, of course, but the recurring revenue is impressive to me. I think that the floor on their business, despite the higher valuation, is going to be a little bit higher. It's going to be easier for them to find success. And I look at all these different spaces that they're in. I talked with Nick Seipel, who hosts the Thursday show, before we came down and taped, because he is a Microsoft bull, loves this company. And he made the point, beyond just cloud, they are one of the leaders in gaming. They are one of the leaders in the AR and VR space with HoloLens. They have their fingers in so many different pies right now. It's pretty incredible. I'm impressed with what they've done, especially with their core product.
I mean, I think you have a good point in terms of downside to the actual fundamentals and things like revenue, because I mean, there's a lot of talk about a recession on the horizon, maybe in the next 1 or 2 years. And if a recession hits, I mean, you're absolutely right. The consumer hardware is going to get hit pretty hard. I mean, people don't have to buy an iPhone if they already have one. They might delay those purchases, but enterprises still got to do business. They're still probably going to be spending a lot of money on Microsoft. So yeah, I think you have a good point there too.
Yeah, those Fortune 500 companies are going to continue to pay for the Office suite. It's nice to disagree every now and then, Evan. I think we spend so much time agreeing with each other. It's nice to take opposite sides of something.